Hello and welcome to the Football Hipsters podcast. Today we're doing another interview and I'm joined by a journalist and author. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Mr. Graham Hunter to the podcast. Graham, how are you doing?
Hello, Tom. I'm doing all right. I don't know if I'm a football hipster, but it's nice to meet you.
That's okay. So we'd like to just get a brief background on our guests. Obviously, we previously had Ali Beg on, and you share a similarity in that you're both Aberdeen fans. But my interest is how you got from an Aberdeen fan to loving the Spanish league and Spain in particular.
It was all to do a little place called Stornoway in the Western Isles. In 1981, I was sweeping the floor in my uncle's shop, which was a sort of part newsagent, part chemists. And I remember that Soft Cell and Tainted Love was on the radio, and I was sweeping away. And I thought to myself, I'm going to the World Cup next summer, no question about it. I'd skived off school to watch some of Scotland's qualifying campaign, one of which was played in the middle of an afternoon on a school day. And I can't really remember what made me decide that it was an absolute imperative that I went to the World Cup in 1982, but I just decided that it was. And I sort of scouted around, trying to recruit people who were daft enough to join me, found 3 of them. And in 1982, I travelled all the way from where I lived in those days in Aberdeen, down to Marbella by train and boat. In those days, an epic journey, a kind of Marco Polo journey. Everything took 4 or 5 times as long as it does today. So it was a journey of about 3.5 days to get from Aberdeen to Marbella, just in time for the first game. And I was very fortunate in that one of the people, my best friend, Graham Runcie, who did come along with me on the whole month that we took an interrail and travelled around Spain. When we'd known each other for ages at school, and when Aberdeen signed Alex Ferguson, Fergie moved in right next door to the house that Graham lived in. And so we kind of knew the family a little bit and knew the sets of parents. We were both young. We were both about 17. I'd never been outside Scotland. No, I'd been outside Scotland once, but I'd never been abroad before. So the 2 of us setting off to a World Cup where the government had issued a warning to supporters, don't go to the Spain World Cup because of the Falklands crisis. It was an actual formal government statement. We don't want British fans to go. I think everybody just ignored them, but nonetheless, neither of our parents were particularly impressed, and they entreated Mrs. Ferguson to get Mr. Ferguson to get us tickets and to kind of be because there were no mobile phones or internet in them days, so we had to report into Alex Ferguson when we got down to Marbella and go out and meet him in Puerto Banús, and he sorted our tickets for the 3 games, or at least for two of the games at least. And lo and behold, we had a sponsor, and that month was, quiet, cultural, lots of museums, meditation. That was a misrepresentation, Tom, of the month in Spain in 1982 at the World Cup. It was absolutely a life-changing experience. It was mental. The escapades were included a lot of gunplay, suffice to say. And the football was spectacular. The passion for the game around Spain, the way in which it was lived daily, the way in which the heat influences your appreciation of a game. The fact that it's not raining, the noise that a crowd made when the ball nearly went in the net was completely different from anything I'd experienced in Scotland. It was football, Jim, but not as we know it. And it took a great hold on me. Not Spanish life in general, the colour and the sounds and the heat and the noise of the how people live their lives, that took a hold. But the football did too, very spectacularly took a hold on me. given that the domestic leagues were finished by then, it was the way in which the Spanish public lived football, the way they argued about football, and that Tom was sufficient for me to decide that that one day I would like to go and study it, and that was something I managed to do when I became a professional journalist. I was often sent on little missions to Spain to either report on games or to interview people, and eventually in 2002 we came to live here, and it happened to be at a time when it wasn't just interesting and a rich football culture as I'd already experienced, but it was the beginning of this golden age when Madrid would routinely win something or other, but Barcelona began a brand of football which I think changed our appreciation of the game, and Spain began to win international trophies. So my timing has been very fortuitous.
Yeah, certainly. Very lucky indeed. I mean, you speak about the start of the Spanish dominance in international football, 2008 and going through to 2012. And we've reached the Euros this year after a disappointing World Cup. And even though we progressed further in the tournament this year, it's still not been seen as a success by any means. I mean, at this point, we look at Spain and think, when you go into a tournament, we're looking to win it. I mean, what were your thoughts of the Euros this year in general for Spain? And also I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the squad decisions in terms of leaving out the likes of Torres and Isco and the like.
Well, I'm treating them in order, Tom. I mean, it was no success whatsoever. I think they've underperformed in terms of a number of significant things, not just the final results, but they never caught fire, caught confidence, caught ruthlessness from the first two wins. I think it's going back to habits of prior to 2008 to be winning a game against Croatia, which at that moment theoretically ushered you into the easier half of the draw, and has subsequently proved to be the case that if Portugal, who are not a better side than Spain in footballing terms, have managed to make the final with really what I would consider to only be one good performance, then Spain's forfeiting of group leadership, when it was very foolish that a rush of blood caused the agreed order for the penalty taking to go awry. But you learn over time, you may well know it may not take time, but I've learned over time that decisions like that, we almost can't avoid reporting with hindsight tainting our view. Sergio Ramos leaps the queue because he's captain. Fabregas was the guy who was supposed to be taking it. Ramos says, "I'm the captain, I'll take it." He misses it. That's a really, really big moment in Spain's tournament, not the match, the tournament. Had he scored, we'd have been writing, "That's typical Ramos, he accepts responsibility, what a character." I make no bones, never have, that I like Sergio Ramos as an individual. I appreciate his manner of playing, faults and all. And therefore, it's going to be hypocritical for me to say that he was outright wrong to force his way to the head of the queue, to annoy Iniesta, who argued with him, and then to miss that penalty. Because people need to step forward, people need to accept responsibility. It just proved that he's a guy who, I think in all or nothing situations, I would rely on him for a penalty. In mid-match situations, just like in the Confederations Cup, I'm not so sure that I would. And not going to 2-1, that's an error that I think can be contextualised more easily than with 3 minutes left against a team which is noticeably athletically quicker and has been throughout the game. For the majority of the people who should have been holding position, who should have been ensuring that the win was seen out, to be caught upfield, that was an error which predates the Luis Aragonés golden era from late 2006, early 2007 onwards. That was a shabby mentality which wouldn't automatically result in a goal, but in this instance did, and there were spurs to indicate which way the game was going, might go, and that was, if you're assessing as backwards as you asked me to do, then it's easy, I think, to go to the Italy game and say they underperformed in the first half and were outrun. The 3-5-2 formation, which has caused Spain so much difficulty in recent times, didn't seem to be something that Del Bosque had catered for. He didn't seem to have anything new to instruct his players to do to handle the superiority in midfield that 3-5-2 was giving Italy. But it just like, if you look at the first Italian goal, De Gea spills the ball from the free kick, but the wall is wrong. I think, in my view, you always look at primary cause, and the goal that Italy score, well, the primary cause is the wall is wrong, for which the keeper takes a partial responsibility for sure. But the ball shouldn't have been so easily allowed to come firing at De Gea at speed before Chiellini scores. And that, I'm making the comparison with the primary cause of Spain going out is their mismanagement of the last 3.5 minutes against Croatia. And that is emblematic of what they learned, what they changed under Aragonés, first of all, and then Del Bosque. They had a ruthless winning mentality whereby not only was 1-0 enough, but if they saw that a team was reeling or loose because of having gone behind, they would go at their throats. When they saw a team couldn't keep up with slip passing, they would outpass them. There was an element, even though Spain remained a small team, where Spain became much more physical, much more streetwise than they had been. And in my view, that kind of worldly wisdom, that street smarts, I wouldn't attribute the horrific 2014 World Cup to that. I think there were very different elements and far more powerful elements. But in this instance, Spain had a team and a squad to win this tournament. They are absolutely neither man for man nor in team basis worse than France. They pulled the rug from underneath their own feet with that crazy last 4 or 5 minutes against Croatia, and that's cost them very dearly. And that is a product of an accumulation of being sated by victory subconsciously, a slight lack of hardness, a slight lack of the hunger, which not in the 90 minutes, but which, because they were, if you want to talk about a good fault, they were hungry for the win against Croatia. They were pushing forward in the same way as they were against Czech Republic. But game management, and the game management that's, I'm not quoting other sides, the game management that Spain have showed over the last 8-9 years in order to become the elite national side was absent. And that's your fundamental reason that Spain are out, Tom.
Yeah. I can't can't not agree with that. I mean, looking forwards, we've got a bit of an ageing squad in some ways. Obviously, we've seen more youngsters come through. We're seeing Bellerin got a call up for the squad, which as an Arsenal fan was great to see, and in some ways a bit scary, being around some Barcelona players, which we've seen in the past has tempted some away. But and Morata as well as another player leading the line. But with the likes of Ramos and Piqué, and obviously we've seen Xavi already retire, and Iniesta coming to the end of their Spanish careers, is it going to be tricky going into the next World Cup, or do you expect a completely new format under a new manager, or do you expect it to be a struggle in Russia?
Well, let's get to Russia first. It's something that you learn. I think that there are too many questions in there to answer clearly and emphatically. Not from you, but there are too many questions which exist. Like, for example, I understand completely, and I'm not being in any way derogatory, but I think to look at Piqué and Ramos and say, well, is that it? Would make you want to look again at the age that John Terry is, that Barzali is, Bonucci is at or around the same age. Chiellini is a little bit older. My opinion would be that Piqué currently is as focused, dedicated and hungry as I've ever seen him. And therefore, the answer to your question will be, it's barring injury, it's what Piqué wants to do that will determine if he's a leading figure in the international side from now till Russia. He should be, and I anticipate he will be. I don't think he'll quit. I think that he, having seen after the victory over the Czech Republic, his little son, Milan, dressed in a Spain shirt, coming down the tunnel steps to go out to the pitch in Toulouse, I think it was, to play football with Piqué, with a little red Spain shirt on and little Milan shouting, Spain are going to win the European Championship again. There's, for all Piqué's dedication to the Catalan cause, I do believe that Spain is something that he still values, and that the likelihood is that if he wants to, he'll be a dominant figure in qualification and then the World Cup. And I think he wants to win the World Cup again. Sergio Ramos is just a touch older. Has certainly been more injury prone in recent years, so I accept the point, but I think that he'll continue playing until he's completely broken, and depending on how he minds himself and how fortune treats him at Real Madrid, I'd fully expect him to be competing to be a Spain leader. I think that when you introduced the question about age, it was startlingly clear how little Spain had when teams managed to nullify Iniesta. If I'm not wrong, I may be wrong after Griezmann's performance in the semi-final, but certainly up to the semi-final, although, Spain had gone out, by the semi-final, nobody had bettered Iniesta's total of 2-match man of the match. And once he was closed down, Spain didn't have the answers. He's 32. It's probably more of a question about whether at 34 Iniesta can be more regularly influential in games than he has been in these last two tournaments. And the answer is probably no, unless there is an exceptional structure around him. I think part of the answer to your question is, does the new manager pay more heed to, as I think he needs to, Javi Martinez, who, although you can make cases for several players, as you did in your previous question, who were excluded, the hard fact is that the biggest problem is not who was left out, but that there's a finite number of players you're allowed to take, and Spain have a glut of players who probably deserve to be there. And there's one who I don't feel embarrassed mentioning, since I said it before the tournament when the list was given out, during and now after. Javi Martinez is the absolute archetypical player that Spain are missing, don't have enough of, and yet the Bosque chose to leave him out. I found that impossible to understand at the time, and subsequently still more so, and therefore choosing a new coach is very, very important indeed, because it's an extremely difficult time. They call it, as you know, the relevo, the changing of the guard. There are young talents there, but handling change in life, managing change in life, in business, in politics, in art, it doesn't matter what it is. It's always testing. It will always seek out flaws in decision making. It needs enormous clarity. It needs risk taking, and it's not easy. It's proved to be the one thing that in his tenure, Bosque didn't manage well. I really think the only thing he didn't manage well was the changing of the guard. That's cost him 2 tournaments. But the new manager, he not only needs to be talented in his own right, visionary and confident, he has a very difficult task in his hand. I think he can simplify it by putting a lot of faith in Javi Martinez, in Thiago. It's long overdue that Thiago began to boss the midfield. The new manager needs to find a way in which Koke's evident skills can be properly employed. Does that mean a rebooting of the system? Because there's, of the really talented footballers, probably the biggest disparity between the way Spain have been playing and a player's talent stroke club philosophy is Koke, because he's evidently got the attitude, the technical ability, the personality to be a very big player for Spain now that things are changing. But he plays in a style of football, Atletico Madrid, which is very diverse to the way in which Spain have been playing. So the question is, as PK posed in the mix zone after the defeat to Italy, I don't think he wasn't, and I don't think anybody of any sense is saying throughout the Spain philosophy, throughout the style, that's wrong. But to not reboot it, to not take account of that there's no Xabi Alonso and no Xavi in the midfield, and that Iniesta is now 32, that would be naive in the extreme. So the changes aren't simply of substituting player A for player B. There needs to be a real understanding of what the format of football, what the belief system, what the idea about how to play and how to maximise the available talents can be from now on. And I think that's a big task. And therefore, before there's a manager appointed, before it's clear who does and doesn't want to stay on for the qualifying campaign, to predict whether it'll be hard to get to Russia, it's an interesting group, all right. I'd imagine that Spain don't want to see Italy twice competitively in the next 18 months. But we as football fans do. I certainly do. Yeah. It will fascinate me, and there's a big change coming at Italy now, given that there's a manager of wildly different age. There's a Del Bosque aged and a Del Bosque style person coming in at Italy. Somebody who's got a great reputation with developing young talents, I'll admit, but there's cataclysmic changes coming between the two nations en route to Russia, and therefore the group will be very, very interesting, and I hope it'll be very enjoyable too.
Yeah, me too. I think you're raising great points. I mean, Koke for me is someone I'm excited about going forwards and what he might bring to the squad. But I know I'm aware of the time, and I just want to ask you 2 brief things. First of all, I want to get your feeling for the final and what you think might happen. Hard to predict, but surely France are the outright favourites. But Portugal surprised so many people. Could they surprise France in the final?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that they could, simply because when I said earlier on that I felt that Spain were a better team, when Spain are a better footballing team than Portugal, there's more individual talent, and when Spain are playing well, if you take Spain for the majority of the Czech Republic game, for the majority of the Turkey game, they would have outplayed and they would have beaten Portugal in my view. What I appreciate about Portugal and what Spain lacked is that they are clearly far more hungry for this. They're far more willing to self-sacrifice. There is a momentum. There is an aggression about things. In the Spain camp, there was a very good feeling, very good team unity. There was patently, obviously, friendship. They were enjoying training. They were enjoying being at the tournament. But were they as downright hungry as I saw them in 2008 and 2010 in particular, and most of 2012? No. And when you look at Portugal, one of the things you can see is that by and large they haven't entertained us for huge swathes of their football. But they've scored some extraordinary goals, in my view, some absolutely fabulous goals. And what I detect is that it has mattered a little bit more to them. That it has been absolutely primevally important for them that they get to the final. And in getting there, they have often closed games down and defended and hit on the break, done a version of, I stress, a version of what Greece did to Portugal last time Portugal were in a European final. And therefore, I accept your proposition that in Paris, France, with, I think, an 18-game unbeaten run, with 2 or 3 spectacular individuals, if we can, particularly Pogba and Griezmann and Payet. There are other players of outstanding quality, momentum, form, self-belief, the fact that they've beaten Germany and in the end relatively comfortably, having been toasted for a while. I don't dispute that France should go into the match as favourites, but what they are not is as good a team, as smooth a team, as technically talented a team, or a team with as much of a game plan as Spain were in 2008 or 2012. Just they aren't, and that's not me being derogatory. When Germany kept the ball, when Germany were coming forward in waves in the semi-final in Marseille, what was absolutely clear was that France were without a system, a plan, a shared set of beliefs of what to do with the ball under pressure that would get them out of trouble. What they had, 2 things had to happen for France. Germany needed to keep on missing their opportunities, and France needed moments of individual, something to happen in an individual basis. And that can win you the final, of course it can. But is it guaranteed to win you a final when you are unquestionably looking for an individual always to do something special, rather than your system or your use of the ball or your tactics, your formation, to give you an absolute bedrock structure that will help you defeat the opponent? That gives Portugal a chance, Tom, I think. And I think that in footballers like Sanchez, like Ronaldo, like Quaresma, they've got people that can change a game, can do something. Nani too is quietly having a very creative, very dangerous tournament. And therefore, I think it's about 52-48, and I'll be glued to it.
Yeah, so I think 52-48 is very, very generous of Portugal, if I'm honest. In my opinion, I think France, what they've shown through the tournament is they've shown real quality. The only thing I would say is that Germany is probably the only real test they've had, but they passed that with flying colours last night. Now, we're going to wrap up. There is one question I have to ask that we ask all our guests. And you said before at the start of the interview that you don't feel you're a football hipster. But we do ask our guests who is their favourite hipster player. Do you want me to define hipster player for you?
It's like you can read my mind.
So basically, a hipster player for us is someone who might not be so heard of in the football community, or someone you feel didn't get the praise they might have done in the past. It can be a current or past player. For me, I've got a bit of partial to Red Bull Salzburg in Austria, and I love Jonathan Soriano, the Spanish striker there. So he's my sort of hipster player. But we've had a previous guest on, Phil Kitramilidis, who chose Luka Modric, and he just loved Luka Modric. He might not be out there and hipsterish, but he just loved the player. So that's the best I can give you in terms of a definition.
Well, given I'm older than both of you, I could probably list you about 50. The first one that probably began to affect me was Zoltan Varga, the Hungarian who came from Ajax to Aberdeen in the very early 70s. Aberdeen, we've always had guys who might be an acquired taste for everybody else. Tiggy Rigby would be one. And then throughout my early watching career, I was mesmerised by people like Alan Hudson, Duncan McKenzie, Tony Curry, and I've always looked at players like them and Letitia, who maybe were underappreciated by their nation, or particularly the international side, but who would make me pay for a ticket, or maybe tune into television for sure. And therefore, I'm going to go for a friend of mine called Simon Stainrod, who was extraordinarily gifted as a footballer, extremely stubborn and dedicated to show and flair and entertainment, probably often ahead of common sense. Under televised because of the age in which he played, but exceptional. And if you could have a Simon Stainrod to buy today, he'd probably be a 40-50 million pound player. Just for the sake of his ego, I hope he never hears this. But if I get the chance, I'll send it to him. As entertaining off the pitch as he was on the pitch. But before I joke too much, very, very, very gifted as a footballer, and therefore able to do things with the ball that makes you love football more, and somebody dedicated to entertainment.
I think you've hit the nail on the head with Hipster. I think you've done very well there. Well, sorry.
I'm learning.
Yeah,
I'm learning.
That's all you can do. Always learning. Well, thank you for coming on, Graham. I really appreciate you coming on.
Pleasure.
You guys can check out. I hope you've been listening to our Euro podcast. We've been doing one every single day. There's a match, so a lot of effort's gone into that, and I hope you've been enjoying them. Graham, I hope if you have enjoyed it, you might come back on in the future, and we might be able to discuss how Spain are looking going into their next international tournament.
It sounds like a deal to me.
Sorted. Okay, thank you very much for listening, everyone. I have to choose now between the end credit words. I can either go for keep your beard strong and your glasses trendy, but that's usually the league season, but we'll keep it as Chris has been saying, our host during the Euros games, which is to keep your pipe stoked and your satchels clean. Thank you for listening to the Football Hipsters podcast.